Hey everybody, it's Mark Myers, the Family Woodworker. Hey, this week we're finally going to finish up those two bedside tables I had promised for my daughter. To see part one of the video, check the link included in the comments section underneath the video. So to begin with, I didn't have to buy, I wound up having some half-inch light double-sided plywood, cabinet grade plywood, and I believe this was maple sided, but half-inch in the thickness, and I wound up cutting it down. I was looking for drawers that were relatively deep, so I cut them down to 5 inches, and then I also wound up buying some oak, quarter-inch oak, where it was double-sided on oak veneer. And so my drawers will be based out of this half-inch plywood with this quarter-inch oak veneer in the bottom. Now, one of the things you're going to need to do, and I needed to do on these drawers, is that the bottom needs to float inside the drawer frame. And I had a dado cutting set for a 7¼ inch table saw, and when I upgraded, they just didn't work really well on this table saw. But I had the shims between two blades, and that actually made up a good solid quarter-inch for me to gouge out. And so I've got a test piece here that the first pass wound up cutting it too wide. This actually comes out to be a quarter-inch wide, and I'm going to cut it a quarter-inch deep. And that will give me just enough to be able to float that drawer bottom inside each one of the drawers as I do the assembly. So we take a pass, we'll check it out. It turns out that I've got a little test sample for a quarter-inch plywood, and it fits in that groove really nicely. So now we're on to assembly. Now each one of these drawers turns out to be, I talked about them being already 5 inches deep. The outer dimensions on these things are 16 inches by 14 on the depth that slides into the drawer frame. On the inner dimensions, they turn out to be 15 by 13 because we're talking about half-inch plywood. And the bottoms are going to be just a half-inch bigger than that 15 by 13 so that a quarter-inch can slide into both of those tracks on both sides and the front and the back. So where the inner dimensions of the drawer are 15 by 13, again, the bottoms are 15.5 by 13.5. I'm also going to send out another apology for the way that I assemble these things. I'm really fond of a lot of YouTube woodworkers out there and their skill levels with putting drawers together and doing box joints and everything else, and I'm not there yet. So these are just butt jointed together with glue, and I wound up using probably 6 1.5-inch nails, driving them 1 inch through the half-inch plywood into the other piece to solidify that drawer. I also mentioned in the first video that while I assembled the front and backs to these cabinets just with glue and some brads and some pin nails, I really wanted to do something to strengthen the cabinet, and this is what I'm going to do here. I made up a little template for quarter-inch dowels, and that way the template spaces the holes exactly the same on every corner, and I wound up using my father-in-law's old antique little drill press. I don't know if you can see the shiny aluminum casing on that drill. It's pretty old, but works great. And then I'll go ahead and cut out. These are oak dowels. I wound up getting this at one of the local big box home centers, so they are available. And then I used my old trick about using a chopstick, 1/2 of a set of chopsticks, to put glue down those particular holes. And so those quarter-inch oak dowels hammered in pretty nicely. And I've got just a little bit to trim off. And so I've got a flat molding saw where the teeth of the blade don't actually protrude beyond the blade itself, so it won't cut into the wood as you're trying to slice across. But I used a little thin piece of cardboard to rest the saw blade on to make sure that I got a good clean cut and I didn't damage the surface. Now I also did some measurements from inside the actual cabinet where I could reach in and take a look at the spacing of the drawer and how it sat against that oak drawer face And then I made some pencil marks on the bottom. I could reach through and make some pencil marks so that I knew how they would fit. And that sort of gave me the guidance to how to physically attach those oak drawer fronts to the drawer. And just to test it, you got to lift it up and push it back, and it works out great. And here are the handles that my daughter, she even purchased them in advance to make sure that I used the right ones and sent those over. So now maybe the part that I dread the most. It takes the most time. It's probably the hardest thing to do on a small cabinet like this is to get the molding to fit on those corners tightly. Now, what I had to do, and you're not going to see all of it in the video, is that I wound up taking several cuts on each one of these, and I would nibble away at the miter to make sure that they were all tight on the corners. And so while it makes it look like I'm just putting them up and getting ready to put them on, there was quite a bit of work in making sure that I could get those corners nice and tight. If you cut it too short the first time, you're kind of done. You've got to start with a new piece of wood. So I always cut them maybe an 1/8 inch over, 1/4 inch over, and then I'll take little nibbles on the saw to make sure that it comes together tight with the next piece. And then I work around the cabinet a piece at a time, from left to right. Now, because it's just me and I don't have a helper, when I get the molding looking pretty nice and the fit is tight, I'll just use some masking tape to hold it in place, checking how they fit in the corners. But the masking tape, obviously it holds it up for me, but it also provides a quick way for me to flip it over and add some glue and get it set up for nailing. So now that this is ready to go, we will flip a side up. We'll start with the glue. And another one of my tricks that I've talked about before, I love these tongue depressors that you can buy in a big pack. And it's nice for spreading out the glue nice and evenly. I wanted to be careful not to use too much glue here because when you try to wipe out or wipe off excess glue off of like oak veneer, it doesn't clean off very well and it actually screws up your staining capability because it kind of seals the wood and the stain doesn't get in as well. So I tried to take extra care to not use too much glue here so there wasn't much squeeze out, if any at all. Now when I nail the corners in, I do the corners first to make sure that they're up and flush to the tabletop. You're always going to find a little bit of bow or bend in the trim, the molding. And so if you do the ends first to get it square to the top, you've got enough room to play with it and use your thumb to move the molding up or down to get it square with the rest of that cabinet line so that the molding is flush with the top. So I always start on the corners and then work to the middle. And I think we're only going to show a couple of these pieces to show you the process for getting these pieces of molding down. But again, it was making sure they were tight in the corner. That masking tape kind of helps you hold everything while you're getting ready to nail it in. And then I'll work towards the center to make sure that it's all flush. And so, even though those corners are tight, there's always going to be one edge, one piece of that molding that sticks out maybe a 32nd of an inch or a 64th of an inch farther than the other piece of molding, which gives you a nice sharp edge to catch your clothing and your knuckles on. So I just roll up a piece of sandpaper, and I think this was 120 grit, just to get it shaped. And I work around the cavities of the molding, just rounding it over just a little bit and making sure that those two pieces of wood come together really nicely. Doesn't take a lot of time, and it winds up coming out great without any big heavy-duty specialty tools. Just a little sandpaper, either folded to get into the tight corners or rolled up like that to get into the round over edge. So this is my test case. I actually tested the stain on one of the feet earlier, so I know that those are going to stain up nice and dark. But every type of wood absorbs stain differently. And so I found when I just took the oak framing material and then I did a quick wipe off, it didn't absorb the stain very quickly, where the molding here seemed to absorb it really well. And this plywood test patch, this is just that oak veneered plywood, that really absorbed the stain quickly. And when I went to do a wipe off, it was nice and dark, and I didn't need to let it sit very long. So it seemed like I had to let the stain sit longer on the trim. And this is how that came out. Again, this was my daughter's order. She wanted something really dark, almost a black type stain, but still wanted to be able to see the wood grain. And that's how this finished up. In fact, the lighting actually makes it look like it's a little more brown in color than it is. The stain isn't midnight dark, but it's pretty dark. And here are the two pieces together. They came out fantastic. The stain is as dark as a coffee table project that I did for my daughter a little more than a year ago. But with about 3 coats of urethane, they'll hold up really well. I'm really pleased at how even the onion feet came out, and those were purchased, so that made the project a little easier. It was a fun project. Thanks for watching.